Now we have a talk by Sasha Bruni towards a 3D MHD integrated model of the sun.
Let's go big. Let's be ambitious. So I'm going to talk about some results we have been doing over the years with several colleagues. There is one part which is due to numerical simulation, and that involves mostly Yuri Toumre, Mark Misch, myself of course, Matthew Browning and Nick Featherstone, and some more recent results that involve helioseismic inversions with Antia and Kumar Chitre. So just going to give you the context, but you all know that very well, so I'm not going to lose much time. We know from helioseismic inversion that the differential rotation of the Sun varies with latitude, but not with radius in the convection zone. That there is a solid body rotation in most of the solar radiation zones, and that the transition between the two is called the tapocline. Okay, so what we are going to do, it's a bit different from Fritz's model. We are not buciness, we are inelastic. So mostly the difference with Fritz is that we don't assume div of v equal to 0, but div of rho bar v equal to 0. So we can take into account stratification effects. I mean, not just stratification effect, but we consider. Of course, we have Lorentz force feedback, we have ohmic heating. We can have, if we want, a volume heating term, if we want to represent nuclear reaction rates. We have the induction equation, and we have a lengthy equation of heat, mostly with this term being a subgrid scale modeling of heat transport.
How do you model subgrid scale?
Yeah, well, mostly we do effective diffusivities for now. So this, this is hidden in D, but for the viscous stresses, the nu here is an effective value, and the kappa here is also effective, but kappa rad is real.
So this is like a larger simulation?
It's I would say it's a pseudo DNS, in the sense that we do assume that we are dealing with mostly the large scale, but since we are doing simulations that are 2,000 cubes sometimes, we cannot really consider this is a LES, because LES you will compute 128 cube, and you will assume everything is dealt with your subgrid scale, where here we push the resolution to and lower our diffusivities to match our resolution. So we are in the spirit of a DNS, except that we have some numerical tricks to deal with some aspect of the flux transport. So it's not a pure DNS.
It's called the Reynolds average, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is full, non-linear.
So how to calculate these coefficients, eta, kappa, and nu?
Oh, we put
There's
them
a question for this.
we choose them.
Just how to choose them.
We know the dimension, we know it's centimeter square per seconds, and we lower the value to the level we can reach.
Where you can reach?
The value we can reach, they are larger than the atomic value, of course.
By
a lot. By a lot.
In LES, effective diffusivity or something modeled. In your case, how do you estimate?
For now we have been trying to implement Smagorinsky, but it doesn't seem to be so efficient, so we gave up. So right now we are just assuming some value that are the value that our code can support before blowing up.
Is it constant or change?
No, it changes with radius.
Change with radius?
Yes.
How change?
It depends. It can be the inverse of. It can be such that the kinematic viscosity is constant, or it can be such that the dynamical viscosity is constant. So it can be as a 1/ρ or not.
It depends only on depth. It doesn't depend
On latitude or longitude.
Huh?
It doesn't depend on the horizontal. Latitude or longitude, it just depends on depth. Yes.
But I mean, it doesn't depend on velocity, so gradient of velocity. So.
For now, it does not. Yes. We are considering doing that, but we find it very difficult to make Ash work with the basics Magorinski, so we are trying to implement dynamic Magorinski to compute the constant everywhere, but it seems to be a lot of mess for not much great progress.
Because it's numerical.
Yeah.
Numerical viscosity.
Yeah, but it implies that you don't use turbulent viscosity, just this is a free parameter.
Yeah, it's kind of a turbulent viscosity. It's an effective diffusivity, as we call it, you know. But it doesn't depend on the local shear.
Yeah, but if you have turbulence in the system, so viscosity immediately will be related with the velocity field,
Yeah,
disturbance velocity, so
we
This
don't
implies-
take into account
yeah,
this
so
aspect
this
of
implies
things.
it's a free parameter.
Yeah, it's a knob that we turn, and as we want to become more turbulent. Well, I've learned one thing by doing. Currently, we are doing an elastic benchmark for the sphere with Chris Jones and Gary Gasteyer. And what we found is that the geodynamo people are doing things different than we do. And the big difference, and you learn to work with another community. And one big difference is that when Fritz, I think, in the same situation than Chris and Gary, when Fritz changes Rayleigh number, is actually changing the luminosity of the Earth is modeling, where we actually fix the luminosity of the star we are modeling. And so that's a bit different in terms of how we play with the parameters, because in order to increase the Rayleigh number, we can just drop mu and kappa. We cannot change delta S, because delta S is more or less fixed by the luminosity we want to carry. So we have one free parameter less than mu in terms of changing our Rayleigh number, I found. In what I have done when we do the, it's very interesting. When we do the simulation with the benchmark simulation, what they say is that let's fix a Rayleigh number to a given constant, and from that you can deduce a delta S for a given nu, let's say nu and kappa. Okay? We don't do that. What we do is that we compute a star which has a luminosity of L star, and that put one more constraint than you do, because here you change your Rayleigh, you double your Rayleigh, then your delta S will be different, of course, but the resulting diffusive luminosity will also change. I don't know by how much, by a little bit, where we fix it to be the solar luminosity. So when we do a parameter space 2D, we do it at constant luminosity. I don't think you do it at constant luminosity. Did you look at the radial flux balance in all your simulations? I'm wondering by how much you vary the luminosity of your model as you change the parameters. I don't know. We always keep it fixed.
What is the Rayleigh number in your simulation?
I can go up to 10 to the 7.
10 to the
7.
When you change this with radius, you keep it same function dependent, so
Well, when I say constant,
mu and kappa.
nu and kappa can be as you want, either constant or vary by the power you want.
But with the same function dependence with the radius.
We usually, but that's something I'm changing currently. Up to now, for the models that were purely convective, I was fixing PR and PM. So nu and kappa were varying with the same exponent. But now that I'm doing models that include a radiative interior, I'm considering doing things that will have a given Prandtl and then perhaps different value for the draft. You see, I'm starting to consider this kind of possibility. But this is very recent, so I have no result to show you.
How do you calculate these mean parameters? Rho, T-mean?
When we start from a seismically calibrated one-dist solar model. So we have a real solar stratification as far as we can go.
Does that provide temperature?
No, yes, we have. I mean, what we do is that we solve a Newton-Raphson.
Static model. Static model.
we assume, yes, a 1D stellar model, you know, solar model, Model S, let's say. I have something equivalent to Model S of Christensen-Dagsgaard. I generate my own Model S that I calibrate with seismic data. So I get, for example, a delta S over S, delta S square over S, where delta means, delta C means C ops minus C model. Okay? So I have a model which has a delta S square less than 1%, so I'm very close to the seismically calibrated model. That gives me a rho bar. I can also get G from that. So I know the gravity of the star I'm modeling. I know I have a guess reference density. I give myself a ds bar over dr. And with that, assuming dpdr is equal to minus rho bar G and S over Cp, or S is equal to Cp ln T minus rho ln P. With this kind of set of equation, I can solve the Newton-Raphson, the first order differential equation that will give me rho bar, and then by assuming that P bar is equal to rho bar T bar, having
This is a
integrated.
basic reference
It's a
state,
mathematical
yeah?
specification. You mentioned the luminosity of how provide luminosity in this.
As a luminosity, I also get from the 1D model, I get the caparade.
Guess what?
Caparade, the radiative diffusivity.
Yeah, but in the convection zone it's not radiative.
And in a convection zone,
More or less it's mixed on LCA.
No, I know. I'm not using that, of course. I'm doing the real convection. But I know the luminosity, and I know what is the caparade at the bottom of the convection zone. In a 1D model, the transition between radiation to convection will be extremely fast. Okay? So if I plot flux balance, let's do that as a function of radius. So, as a function of radius, here being 0, here being the base of the convection zone, here 1. In the 1D model, we got that. That's the radiative luminosity. And you get the convection.
Not quite so steep.
Yes, it's very steep.
At 0.7, no.
Oh, for the radiative luminosity, yes. For the radiative luminosity, oh, believe me, this is extremely steep. Yes.
Not so steep on the surface.
I think at 0.8 it's still 50%.
Yeah.
For the 1D model, I don't think so. No. I have done 1D model, I can tell you it's not.
1D model
Of the sun,
okay.
that I used to start my 3D model. I don't use a polytrope. A lot of people are using polytropes to initialize.
So
I use a real 1D model of the sun that has been calibrated with seismic data. And in my 3D model, let's say that. So here we have this is L over L sun, okay, and this is the value of 1. So we are about at 1, and here this is the end of the convective core where we are almost at, let's say, close to be 99% for the solar luminosity. In my 3D model, this curve will be smoother. Okay? In the 3D model, I will make it a little bit more smoother than it is in the 1D model. But the value here of caparade, such that L-rad is equal to 4 pi r square f-rad, and f-rad is equal to minus caparade rho bar Cp dt bar over dr. I think that's correct. Then this caparade will give. I need to have a guess from the 1D model to know what value is here, and then I can. If I use the 1D solar stratification from the 1D model, that will be exactly the same profile than I got in the 1D model for my radiative luminosity. Since I don't use exactly the same stratification, I need to compensate this coefficient by the difference between the two stratifications. So one I use in a 3D model and the one I have in a 1D model. But they are very close.
For convective flux, initial convective flux is 0? Or how
The initial convective flux is 0. I start with an unstable background because I have a negative entropy gradient. So ds bar over dr is negative.
Different standard model, right?
But it is as far as I can go, and then this DSDR profile in the 1D model drops to very strong value in the superadiabatic layer, and then I don't deal with that, so I cannot. But for most of the convection zone, I use that as a first guess, you know, and so of course I have a DSDR which is negative. I have a Rayleigh number which is greater than the critical Rayleigh number. So I have the condition to become unstable, and so I perturb with 3D perturbations on the entropy.
Yeah.
I create small fluctuations on my entropy field in 3D, and that triggers the convection stability.
What is the critical Rayleigh number?
But the critical Rayleigh number depends of your rotation rate, because we know that the critical Rayleigh number is proportional to Taylor number to the 2/3, at least in the bootsiness limit. So it depends of your rotation rate. Of the order of, let's say, 10 to the 3, few 10 to the 3. Okay, few 10 to the 3. The exact number is difficult to get in the inelastic approximation. It's much easier in the bootsiness.
Just order of value.
Yeah, it's so of the order of few 10 to the 3, perhaps up to 10 to the 4, and most of our models are in a range 10 to the 4, 10 to the 7. Okay. So we are highly supercritical.
Yeah, but it's stratification from stable. So stratification from stable.
Yeah, but the entropy stratification is unstable. This is okay for a 1D model when you solve the mixing length theory and you assume Schwarzschild criteria. But in a real simulation like we are doing, this Schwarzschild criteria doesn't give you, sorry for my French, shit, because if your Rayleigh number is below your critical Rayleigh number, diffusion processes are going to kill your perturbation and your convection is going to die. So real convection and stability needs to have both an unstable stratification and a Rayleigh number large enough that your perturbation doesn't get damped by the diffuse process. Okay?
And what's your equation of state?
Kerfeld-Gas law. So rho bar.
Yeah.
Modulo R rho bar, and in R I include mean molecular weight, and this mean molecular weight corresponds to a mixture of hydrogen and helium.
Fully analyzed.
I mean, the Rayleigh number is normally defined with respect to a hydrostatic reference solution.
Yeah.
And I was always under the impression that for a real solar model, the reference stratification would have a much thinner extent, right? Or was it much more, much bigger? Okay, no. That the radial extent would be very different from the actual extent of the sun. Of what is now the convection zone is in the unstable case. I mean, if you have the radial gradient, that's much bigger, and I think then you have a much thinner.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
I mean,
For me, the convection zone is defined by the opacity of your plasma, and where your opacity becomes too opaque, you have to trigger convection because radiation cannot transport. And then at the photosphere, the atmosphere becomes transparent again, and you.
Addition from solar model.
No, but that doesn't give you the proper Rayleigh number. The Rayleigh number is defined with respect to a reference solution which satisfies a hydrostatic pollution. And such a model only a few people have. And those models certainly have a different radius because the surface is defined where the temperature goes to zero. Whatever. Does it answer the question?
No, I mean it's.
I mean, the radius will be given by when the temperature goes to zero.
It's consistent anyway, so
but it goes to very small values, so it will drop all of a sudden.
Temperature?
The temperature will drop all of a sudden, yeah, when you go to the near.
No, I mean the temperature. We know that at the base of the convection zone, the temperature is about 2.26 million.
Now we go upwards.
And at the surface, it's around 6,000 K.
Yeah.
Okay, that you get radiation.
But if you transport this flux with the radiated diffusivity, then you will have a different radius. The temperature will be at the 6,000 Kelvin at a, I think, much earlier position.
With the radiative, I'm not sure. We can discuss that after. I'm not sure I understand what you want to say exactly. So.
I mean, the lower boundary is, of course, a different one when you have just radiation, because due to convection, of course, it holds a part of the stable lower radiation
You're
part.
speaking of the penetration here?
Yeah, because
But
it's
with
already taken into account there.
No, the
Because,
penetration,
otherwise you wouldn't
in the
have-
1D model it's not, but in the 3D model, when I include the stable layer below my convection zone, I do get a negative enthalpy flux that corresponds to a overshooting layer. And this overshooting layer depends on the stiffness of my radiative zone. So if I vary, well, this is a different model. This is what I want to discuss after, but I can go again and plot. So when you have the, as a function of radius and 0.7, and now we are plotting ds bar by dr. So we have a value here which is very close to 0 and then drop to very negative value near the superadiabatic layer. And at the base of the convection, this has got that shape. Okay? And this is around, let's say, 10 to the minus 2, about 10 to the minus 2. So when you go from a value which is 10 to the minus 7 to 10 to the minus 2, this is a very stiff transition. So you can play with different models, and you can perhaps make one that does that and goes just to 10 to the minus 5, let's say, for example. And when you play with that parameter and that jump in DSDR, you find that your overshooting layer will become smaller and smaller as you become stiffer and stiffer. And that we expect.
But you fix, your opacity, the function of radius, right?
Yeah, because we don't have Cramer's law, we
Yeah,
don't
because,
do this.
If you do this properly,
Then things
you'll
will
get more, yeah.
adapt
Yeah.
on secular Kelvin and Morse time scales, so which are 100,000 years, and so we cannot do that.
much faster.
So what we are actually working right now on a relaxation scheme with Mark Misch and Nick Featherstone in order for this model with a stable layer to be able to make the relaxation much faster. Right now, I will show you in the other model, what I'm doing is that I run my model with a stable layer. So I have my enthalpy flux that does that. So of course, when I look at the total luminosity, since my radiative luminosity had the normal shape, let's say it does that. When I do the sum of these things, I don't know if I have a red pen somewhere, but I wish I had a blue pen here. If I do the sum of this, if I do the sum, then I got a dip here. You see, for the total luminosity, this is L tot. And so what I'm doing right now is that I run that model with that dip due to overshooting. When this has reached a stationary state, I correct my caparade in order to introduce a bump in the radiative luminosity to compensate for the dip I got in the enthalpy flux in order to get one everywhere. Okay, so this is the shipman trick, and of course we will try to do the relaxation more properly, but we are working on it.
Yeah. Maybe we go on because other people can die before you will finish.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we can stop there. I think we answer all your questions. No? We are fine. Well, anyway, well, when you put, you increase your Reynolds number, you go from laminar solution to more turbulent solutions. So, what I would call banana cells or busicolon to non-busicolons. But the Reynolds number is much smaller here than it is here. One Reynolds number was 400 and this one was about
And the
30.
Reynolds number is based on the thickness of the convection.
Yes, but the RMS velocity. That's the maximum
So
velocity.
we see this column, convection, like crystal shown.
In the laminar case, you get these banana cells that are in blue downflows and in yellow upflows, and they are tilted due to differential rotation, and then these are famous modes of instability. You have two types of modes when you do the linear stability of a convective shell, polar modes and equatorial modes, and these are, I think, the dominant modes in the equator. Fritz has done that in 1980 or 1970s. He can tell you much more than me.
Here you change 3 parameters at the same time, upper and lower primal.
Now, yeah, this is at different depth,
Yes.
the same simulation,
Mm.
and this is at the 3 different depths. And what I have done, I have increased the level of turbulence and the resolution of the simulation. But you will see
But
even.
you also change frontal number.
Yes, but I have cases that are like that one at Prendel.
Okay.
It was, these are all figures. And of course, when you look at that, depending on the parameters you have, you can get some semblance of the differential rotation. So it's not perfect. You still have a little bit of cylindricity, but you do get fast equator, slow pole, and some. It's not perfect in that case, but we have better cases. And when you look at the meridional circulation, so just to be clear, red means you are going in a plane and you are prograde, and blue means you come toward you and you're retrograde, and so you have a shear like that. Okay? And this is the meridional circulation, and the meridional circulation transport heat, angular momentum, and energy poleward or equatorward, depending on where you are in
And
situation.
the battery, you know what you mean, you know, you can reproduce the observed differential rotation.
Yes.
How do you do this?
I do that by putting a baroclining forcing. By introducing baroclining forcing. So here, this equation. So if you take the curl of the momentum equation, if you are stratified, you have a rho bar, and when you take the curl of the pressure gradient, and you have 1 over rho grad P, and you have divided, so the Navier-Stokes equation, which is here, you take this rho bar, you put it there, you take the curl of this equation, this 1 over rho bar grad P gives you this baroclinic term.
Yeah. Sorry, but differential rotation and meridional circulations, this is a mean field object.
You know, this is the axisymmetric part of the convection.
Okay.
So this is the m equals 0
yeah, this I
flow
understand.
of the simulation, but this is full freely.
But in order to get differential rotation, you average the system. You have turbulence here or not? In your DNS.
Don't you see it there? It's not obvious that I got turbulence here,
this
it's
is
not
turbulence.
axisymmetric.
So you averaged over what in order to get differential rotation?
But as you,
You average over this angle.
yeah, this is the longitude, this is the meridional cut.
Yes,
This is
over
r
theta.
theta.
So,
This is r theta, and you look in the
Uh-huh.
meridional plane by doing a longitudinal azimuth average. I thought that was clear since Fritz discussed that just before. Differential rotation is the m equals 0 part of the longitudinal component of the velocity.
okay, so in order to get mean field quantity, you average only over the angle.
Angle and time.
And time.
Eventually,
Okay, fine.
yes.
Mhm. So you average over how many correlation times?
Or usually over 10 solar period.
10?
10 solar period, and the convection is about 20. I mean, the correlation, the convective overturning time in the simulation and the rotation period in the Sun is close to 1. It's not the case in the Earth, but in the Sun, it's not far from 1. So the Rossby number is close to 1. A
Do you
bit
have-
less than 1, actually.
Do you have here separation of scales?
It depends on the model.
What?
If I have in my most turbulent case,
Yes.
I have 3 decades of wave numbers, so I start to have a significant scale separation. But in the more laminar case, it's not as obvious. Okay. So I just want to say about something about the key question we want to understand is that why is the solar differential rotation non-cylindrical? Why is it conical in shape? Why does, at mid-latitude, the sun rotate along cones and not cylinders? And one way of understanding that, I mean, why is puzzling us? The reason why it's puzzling us is that normally you have Taylor-Putman theorem that tells you that in a rotating system, you should be quasi-2D and invariant along the axis of rotation. So you should get cylinders. Or in the sun, you get cones. So you need to break Taylor-Putman constraint. And how do you break Taylor-Putman constraint? Well, and that's the theme of my presentation, you will see. But one way of doing it is to have the baroclinic term here. And that baroclinic term can be seen as being proportional to the gradient of entropy with latitude, or the gradient of temperature with latitude. So the question is it easy or not to get a strong enough variation of latitude, of entropy with latitude in order to break Taylor-Putman constraint?
This equation for vorticity, this equation for mean field or for fluctuations?
For everything.
Okay, this exact equation.
So let's look at maps. Again, meridional maps are theta maps, average in longitude and in time over the same temporal sampling that I did for the differential rotation and meridional flow. And you see that indeed I do have variations of entropy and temperature in my models, and that the entropy is cool at the equator and hot in the pole, and that the temperature fluctuation at the base of the convection zone is monotonic. I do go from cool to warm. At the surface, there is a small warm equator, then cool mid-latitude and hot poles. So it's a bit more bundled. It's not monotonic. And the difference between entropy and temperature is, of course, density or pressure fluctuation. That's the difference between being Boussinesque and anelastic. In an elastic system, you need to consider the entropy, because you can have variation of density of temperature that compensate each other to give you entropy variations. So that's a bit different between us, I think.
What is the Mach number you can get?
In the anelastic approximation, you are allowed to go only up to Mach numbers of 0.2, 0.1, 0.2. So then, if you become transsonic, the anelastic approximation fails.
Yeah.
One question. Yes. This figure is, as you mentioned, so you already averaged azimuthal direction and time. So in this sense, this is a profile of mean field. I mean, averaged field.
Yes.
And you are...
With respect to a symmetrically average state, so these are fluctuations. Of course, as you can see in the scale here, I go from minus 4K to 6K, so I only have 10K of variations. But of course, at the bottom of the convection zone, I'm at 2.2 million degrees, and at the top of my domain, at 100,000 K. So we're speaking of small fluctuation with respect to a spherically symmetric reference state. This rho bar and T bar I was speaking earlier.
Okay, so my concern is that if we suppose we consider the averaged equation, so in such a case we have some term, additional term like Reynolds stress term. Okay, so in such a case, of course it depends on the magnitude of such fluctuation terms, but we may have some factor break the Taylor-Putman theory in addition to the baroclinicity.
Of course, I'm going to show you these terms.
Okay.
You are just ahead of me. Okay. That's the whole point of my discussion, and also even going to show you the baroclinic term in the sun, because we have just inverted that and the paper has been accepted to astronomy and astrophysics. Okay? So that's...
You said that's a few degrees Kelvin
in latitude.
In latitude. How much is observed on the sun? I mean, is there
at the surface, only about 1K. and that's I'm going to tell you about. There is a very nice paper that makes a summary of all this by Mark Rast in 2008 that has summarized the last 30 years of effort in trying to get through different techniques at the surface the variation of T. And it's about 1K, 1.5K. It's very difficult to get. Depends, sometimes you go up to 3K for some people. So, but when you look at the helioseismic inversion, you do find that this small variation of temperature at the surface seems to be different as you go deeper in the convection zone. So that's the point of my, these are very recent results. So now you can do one trick. You can look at V phi azimuthally average. You can take the derivative of dV phi over dz. You can compute the baroclinic term. And you can make the difference of the two and see if you are in agreement or not. And as you can see, you are in agreement, yellow means 0, so you are in agreement in most of the region, but you have disagreement in others. So where are these disagreements coming from? Well, you have either Reynolds stresses, viscous stresses, or if you are magnetized, Maxwell stresses.
Sasha, what does mean you in agreement with what?
Well, you have a dV phi over dz.
Yes.
And if you have looked at the equation before that I showed, you have dV phi over dz is equal to that if you assume a strict Fermat-Lewin baroclinic balance. Then the question is that if I subtract from this quantity that quantity, am I getting 0 everywhere, or am I getting departure from 0 at some key places? And if yes, what are the terms at the origin of that departure?
Okay. How do you determine thermal wind? This is a balance between what and what?
I just show you. This is a balance when you use the vorticity equation,
Yes.
and you assume that you are at small Rossby number. You drop all this term of advection that didn't I forgot, I don't know your name, but the attendant say that, oh, why are you doing that? That's weird. So when you assume, when you say, okay, I forgot that I think part of this term give you that one. So when you keep that one and that one, assume stationarity to get rid of that one, drop that term, neglect viscous effect, then you need to have a balance between that term and that term. And so you compute them in your simulation.
Sorry, not so fast. So this is a balance between last term and
part of that one.
this term.
Because
Okay.
this is the absolute vorticity. So the absolute vorticity, but that's going to be clearer in the next slide. But omega here is meaning actually, so I should have a little a for absolute vorticity. So it's omega plus 2 omega 0, the planetary vorticity. And omega here is curl of u, okay? U being the velocity. So there is a little, I should have a little a here, not for that, but here I should have a little a to say this is the absolute vorticity that includes also the planetary vorticity. And then, as you can see, the planetary vorticity stays here. So this term, when you split it, when you assume now that your Rossby number, which is omega over 2 omega 0, is less than 1, then you can neglect in the total vorticity, absolute vorticity, you can neglect that term with respect to that one, and that term, if you have a little a here, and I forgot, will give you this term here. Okay? Well, I can give you my paper and you will find that explained in details. So now, we have seen that with a contrast of temperature of about 10K, we could get some agreement with the sun, but it's not perfect. So the idea was to say, this is the model I was discussing with you. We had 9Ks. So now we decided that we will do an experiment. We will say, oh, it seems that the baroclinic forcing is playing some role in breaking the Taylor-Pullman constraint. Can we, by imposing an entropy variation as a function of latitude as a new boundary condition, rather than let it free to evolve as what you want, now let's enforce at the bottom of the convection zone that entropy variation, and let's see how the differential rotation profile change as a function of the thermal forcing. So when I put 0 constant s to 0 by having a decomposition over the spherical harmonic 2 and 4, axisymmetric one. When I put A2 and A4 to 0, I have a constant s, I have a temperature fluctuation of about 3 degree Kelvin, so that does imply that K, S and T are not exactly...
You did some jumps in your equations.
Jumps?
You did
It's a boundary condition.
huh?
It's a boundary condition.
And boundary condition is
Yeah.
14.
I import that as a boundary condition. Okay?
On what
So-
boundary condition?
Yeah, entropy.
On entropy.
Yeah, I'm solving for
But then-
entropy in my code.
But then you have also the heat flux, right?
But that's on the top. That's the heat flux is not a boundary condition for me. It's a convection in a system like the sun is a forced system. So I'm forcing a heat through, but I have an entropy. I can change my boundary condition.
So what was the initial boundary condition?
The initial boundary condition could be a constant S or constant ds bar over dr.
So when you had constant S in your first simulation, right? Then
No, in my first, in this simulation, I have a ds bar over dr equal to 0. I have no gradient of entropy.
Is it actually the convection and vanishing on the low boundary?
Yes.
So then, wouldn't then the correct boundary condition be the one in terms of gradient, temperature gradient?
There is you can have well we are enforcing a flux. So yeah, you have small fluctuation with respect to the imposed flux. If you want. I impose yes, there is small fluctuation when you have non-zero entropy gradient. It's consistent. We can work it out. So then you increase the coefficient A2 and A4, and you find that we become more and less cylindrical, up to a point where we have increased it too much, and we become almost disc-like instead of cylindrical. So the question is, okay, we can find a value in between where we become conical in rotation. So it seems to be working. Well, that works because it's a laminar model. When you are more turbulent, the problem is that in the more turbulent model, you have in the heat equation, you have a competition between V dot grad S and kappa rho bar T bar D grad S. And this is more or less the Peclet number. Which is about VL over kappa.
You consider equation for entropy here.
Yes.
Balance between nonlinear term and dissipated term. Right?
Yeah, and the problem is that when you become more and more turbulent, these terms and the Peclet number becomes bigger and bigger. And when your Peclet number becomes bigger and bigger, the fact that we are enforcing a boundary condition and we got it to propagate through diffusive mean for the laminar case, that starts to be a bit offset by the more turbulent state that we have, and it's not as efficient at breaking Taylor-Coleman constraint. That's the side current. So now the question is, one simple question, is the sun in thermal wind balance? So we wrote a paper with Angel and Kumar-Chitra, is the solar convection zone in strict thermal wind balance? And we have looked at that. We use helioseismic inversion to try to invert the thermal wind balance in the sun and see what the sun is telling us. That has been accepted. So one way of doing that through inversion procedure, you can get rho and grad and nabla 1 being one of the adiabatic exponents. And by a trick of standard thermodynamic variables, you can express delta C square over C square as perturbation of the density and temperature with respect to a background state, background model, or you can do the same with delta S. So we have a mean through helioseismic inversion to invert either the temperature map in the sun or the entropy map. And since we have, by other mean, using the rotational splitting of the acoustic modes, we can invert the rotational profile. We can then compute independently the baroclinic term on one side and the dV phi over dz on the other side, compare the two, and see if we have in the sun through heliosysmic inversion a tendency toward thermal wind balance or not. So
This is for radial dependence, right?
that's only for convection.
For radial dependence.
Now this is a 2D inversion, r and theta.
How can do 2D inversions?
Eh ben, we are very strong. No, I'm kidding. No, we are doing a 2D inversion like everybody else. I'm not the inversion guy, but you know, you can invert differential rotation with 2D. So you can also invert temperature fluctuation in 2D. Huh?
But not for temperature.
Eh, why?
Because it's no such data.
There is no such data as what?
Can you
We
experiment?
have rotational splitting. You have in cosmology, you have mean frequency measurements for radial structure. Then you have frequency splitting. They depend on differential rotation. And you have also even coefficient that depend on electricity.
Well, I think...
Which is mostly due to centrifugal force.
No, I see your point. I see your point.
And this effect is not measurable.
Into the inversion made in 2D for the thermal field assumes certainly a certain equation of state, and I mean Antia does 2D inversion of the temperature field. So
Not the wrong. Because this splitting it depends on the magnitude of rotation, right? And in splitting coefficients. Not temperature.
well, that you will have to ask.
Okay, fine. What is the answer?
Yeah, so the solution is, as you can see, for the delta t, this is the GOM and this is the MDI result. The fluctuation of temperature are very tiny near the surface. I can show you a blow up. I have a plot where I ask Antia to blow up this region. But you see that we have indeed some large variation of delta t as a function of radius and different latitude. And when you look at the entropy, it's not as systematic. Well, these are the inversion of temperature and entropy. And then, again, I recall you the thermal wind balance. And now we can compute the terms that involve the derivative of the entropy with latitude. And we can compute the terms that involve the z derivative of the rotational rate. And you find that we have a very bad agreement. So, at least, if we consider, there are two answers when you look at that. Either, as Sasha said, the inversion of wrong, and so we cannot conclude, or you say the inversion are correct, and if it is the case, then that means that in the equations, the equations, yeah, no, of course. And then I think what that tells us, if we believe that the inversion are correct, and I put in the conclusion that they can be wrong, so don't get me. I've been precautious, and I said this can be totally wrong, so let's not conclude too much. But if we are not wrong, then that means that we have other terms contributing. Okay, and this other term contributing, here they are. Okay. So dV phi over dz has a term involving advection of shearing of vorticity, advection of vorticity, compressibility, baroclinic term, departure from baroclinic term and due to departure from adiabaticity, viscous stresses, then a bunch of terms involving magnetic fields that we will call, this is called in the geodynamo community the magnetic wind. If you have heard of that term, the magnetic wind, usually what they say is that if you forget all these terms, you can have a dV phi over dz that is triggered by magnetic stresses. Okay? But in the simulation I show you, we have not considered magnetic effects yet. So we have just looked at these different terms. So then I went into... Yes,
this equation is obtained by taking curl of the Navier-Stokes equation.
yes,
And that's it.
that's it.
Okay. And this is phi component of this equation.
Yes,
Okay. And steady state.
and steady state. And so you can look at the model. This is dV phi over dz. And then you can look at the baroclinic term, and you see that between the baroclinic term and the dV5 by dZ, there are differences. We have seen that earlier. So the question is where this difference comes from, okay, as you say. And here you have the stretching term, advection term, and the viscous term. And when you add these three terms to the baroclinic term, you get this right-hand side. And this right-hand side is very close to the left-hand side. So the answer to your question is yes, purely baroclinic balance is not even true in our simulations. Doesn't seem to be true at all in the Sun, but modulo that the inversion can be wrong. And the terms contributing beside terms 4 is term 6 and terms 1 and 2.
So the magnetic terms contribute.
No, the magnetic term, I haven't yet done that. That's the follow-up work.
Sorry, what is A5? That was the main thing? What is, sorry, yeah.
These terms here, these are Maxwell's viscous stress that have a complicated structure. This is in the paper. I give the expression in the paper. I didn't give the expression here.
A is the vector potential, yeah?
No. No, here, no. No, these are viscous terms.
Ah, this viscous. Oh, okay. Why use such notations?
If you're interested, I will give you the paper. It's not accepted. So here are the expression of A. And okay. So this involves the viscous stress tensor. You take the curl of the divergence of a second rank tensor. It's a mess. Okay. So it's why I don't show it.
But in future, it's better don't use such notations.
But it's a curl. It's a curl.
Yeah, I
A.
understand.
It's a very nice A. It's not a straight A. So, well, that's where I can stop, and I think that's enough. Then I could go on and discuss other things, the model with stratification, and I don't think you want to go into that. But well,
So what's the conclusion about different stratification?
how I explain it, we have angular momentum transport due to Reynolds stress that accelerate the equator and slow down the poles. And this is the dynamical origin of the differential rotation. In order to get the acceleration in the Sun, you need to have Reynolds stresses. So the differential rotation of the Sun is due to dynamical effect, where we think that the tilt of the isocontours are due to thermal effect, mostly due to baroclinic effect, but also certainly again to Reynolds stress.
So need some mean field theory effect in your model, or how you model this?
In the mean field theory, how I model that? I'm not sure in the mean field theory how I model that. You have to have Reynolds stresses and thermal wind and thermal transport. So
What's missing in your simulation? So I don't get.
in some I do get the right answer. So if you get the thermal, here let me show you that result. These are very high resolution simulation. As you can see, Fritz, when you push the Reynolds number, you start to get, and density contrast, this is a simulation, you put density contrast of 350. So when you push the density contrast and you have a density scale height that start to be very small, of the order of few megameters at the surface of your simulation, you start to trigger very small scale convection. So the question is now we need to push the Reynolds number. This is very costly simulations, equivalent to 18,000 cube, or perhaps even more.
So can you go closer to the surface now?
No, I don't have a treatment of. So, just to go very fast, the latest model I've been developing are models that couple convection and radiation. And in this model, as you can see, I got a very nice differential rotation, a natural tachopline, a solid body rotation. So I do get something that can start to be very close to the Sun. And as you can see, that goes from 7% up to 97% in radius. And you have nuclear core, well, modeled by a heating force. You get enthalpy flux with the overshooting layer here, negative enthalpy flux. You have convection transport, kinetic energy that are downward. I have modified it to have a little bump in the radiative interior in order to get almost one everywhere. And that gives you very nice differential rotation, so we can get it.
Why is it pushed to in equatorial region, you have this plateau, you know, that is
Ah, because we still have some work to do. So we can look at the angular momentum balance in radius and latitude, but whatever. What I wanted to show you, which I think is of importance, because that bears into what I just discussed, this is the entropy map and temperature map in the whole sun mostly. And you can see that there are very strong thermal structure at the base of the convection zone. And these thermal structure, we think, are key to get the tilt of the angular velocity profiles. Okay? Because that's what these structures that we get naturally in this simulation, which is self-consistent, we have put by hand in a plot I showed you 5 slides before, where we were playing with the forcing as a boundary condition. Here it's just self-consistent. And what's important is that I've looked at the thermal wind balance in that case as well, with the different terms. So exactly the same plot with only the convection zone, but now with the radiative interior as well. And what you find that is very interesting is that, again, in a convection zone, which is between the dashed line and the surface, you get departure from baroclinic effect. This is a baroclinic term. But if you look carefully, in the tachocline itself, there is an exact thermal wind balance. So in the radiative zone, in the tachocline, the sun is in strict thermal wind balance, where in the convection zone, even in the models, there is departure from strict thermal wind balance. So that, I think, is a very key result, and we think we understand it from a theoretical point of view. The change of DSDR does help you to get toward the baroclinic balance. That you have a positive DSDR.
You perform calculations also in the radiative zone?
Yeah.
So
And
do you
compute
have-
everything.
Yeah, do you have turbulence in the radiative zone? or
I
not?
have not turbulence, I have penetration, of course, over the distance of the overshooting layer. Okay.
Yes.
So here I have strong turbulence. I mean, I have penetration, convective plumes penetrating, breaking, and mixing horizontally and generating waves. And so deeper down, what I'm getting, and I'm going to show you, it's okay. I got some penetration, and I trigger internal waves, and you can see them in 3D in an equatorial plane. Here, this is convection flow, and here you have density fluctuation. You see the waves in the equatorial plane, but in 3D it's even better,
You mean
because
the
here you have an
waves?
idea of the sun in 3D, where you have waves generated all over the place in the radiative interior.
Internal gravity waves, you mean?
They are actually mixed. They are gravito-inertial waves, because we are rotating.
Yeah.
And when I put
okay.
when I'm putting magnetic field, these are called alveno-gravito inertial waves, or in the geophysical community they are called MAC waves, MAC waves. But so we are currently studying with Stéphane Matisse on the theoretical point of view, using the classical approximation, the property dispersion relation of MAC waves. And with numerical simulation, we are going to study them non-linearly and how they transport angular momentum and things like that. So,
And there is no linear interaction between waves inside the stable stratified.
there is, you see, it's a mess. So when I am trying to do the spectra, as I go deeper, so 70%, 68%, 66%, 63%, 54%, 41%,
Percent of what?
percentage of the solar radius.
Ah,
As I
okay.
go deeper in the radiative interior
Oh,
to see how the waves are propagating, and doing the spectra as a function of the spherical harmonic degree and the function of frequency. And you see that I have a full spectra here because that's due to the fact that I'm so close to convection that I trigger a lot of turbulence. But as I get deeper down, I'm starting to have radiative damping of some of the modes, and I'm starting to select some of the internal waves, and I get this kind of spectra. But this I don't really understand yet. I need to study in more details.
But convection only is a source of these waves. I mean, no, not convection, the boundary. Convection and stable stratified.
Well,
Why you think
we
that?
have a discussion right now among theoreticians. It's not completely clear if all the waves that are seen in the sun, not seen but expected in the sun, are just due to the penetration of turbulent plumes, or if they are also excited within the convection zone, even though they are evanescent there, and then could propagate in a radiative interior. So some people say that it could be possible to have a volumetric excitation of internal waves within the convection zone that are superimposed on excitation of waves with penetration at the boundary between convection and radiation. But this is not completely studied in details, and nobody has a definitive answer on that point. So we are currently working with my colleagues in Meudon and with my colleague in Saclay. We are trying to work on that problem to try to find out which is most likely to occur. Of course, here it seems that in my simulation the penetration part is dominating the volumetric part, but we need to design more specific diagnosis to understand that. You wanted to ask a question?
No.
You? Yes.
How is the marginal circulation of this model?
It's multicellular.
Multicellular.
Yeah, always. That's something we are still getting in these models. I'm not sure if it's true or not. We don't have enough inversion to constrain that.
Okay. This model that you use can be used also for general relativistic stuff.
No.
They don't people work on that.
No, we don't do GR, MHD. I know people who are doing GR, MHD, but I don't. But I have good colleagues in Meudon, Silvano Bonazola, Eric Bourboulon, who are doing general relativity hydrodynamic and GR, MHD, and they are computing compact stars and merger of two compact stars and things like that. So. I know who to point you to in France if you want to discuss that aspect of things, but I don't. I stay with more classical stars. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Okay, please.
Okay. Now I know who you are. my name is Nobuyo Koi from Tokyo. And now, returning to my first question.
Okay.
So, may I consider your result suggest the importance of turbulence modeling for the transport coefficient? Is it,
I mean, it's true that when we change the Reynolds number of our simulation, we do get different answers for the mean flow, and we are not yet in the asymptotic regime where changing mu and kappa doesn't make difference in your model, unfortunately. We wish we could be there, but we don't. So, yeah, it could be important to have a better description of subgrid scale and diffusivity. I agree. And it's not that we don't try, it's just it's hard to get it to work.
yeah.
So, but if you have ideas, I'm interested by hearing, but we have already asked some people who are experts on that, and so often what we find is that when you start to go to very subtle and sophisticated subgrid scale models, the non-linearity is in your subgrid scale models more than in your equations, you know, and that's a bit a problem, you know. When you start to have things that are involve third order terms, v dot grad v dot everything square or whatever, you start to have trouble dealing with this term more than you have to solve the equations themselves, you know. So at a certain point I'm in favor of doing DNS, you know, and trying to push the resolution. So one big change we are doing right now in ASH, and it's difficult but we are progressing, is to change the radial stratification. We are using Chebyshev domain, Chebyshev decomposition. We have two stacked Chebyshev domains. And right now we are changing that to a non-uniform fourth order difference scheme, finite difference scheme, in order to be able to go to very high radial resolution. And on the same time, being able to split our effort on many processors. And by being finite differences, we will have less communications, because right now we are able to run up to 8,000 cores, and depending on the resolution of our models, above 8,000 cores, our scalability and efficiency drops in the code. So if we want to be able to run on petascale computer, and I even hear people speaking of exascale computer, so if you want to be able to run on computers at 1 million cores, you need to change the way you make your models, you know. So we are working on the aspect and hoping that putting, for example, 1,000 of nodes on a radial direction and 500 in a horizontal direction, we will be able to run on 500,000 cores and be able to do perhaps 10,000 cube simulations. I don't know, but I mean, it's what we are aiming at, you know, and we are not saying we are able to.
Okay. Okay.
How
Thank
this,
you.
how this helps to solve the dynamo problem?
That's a good point, and I'm going to show you how I think this could solve the dynamo problem. I didn't discuss that part, but we have done as a first step before doing the fully integrated model. We have done
new features actually too, you know, this is a new feature that you push, you know, that constant differential rotation inside convection zone.
I know. I'm not in a situation where I can discuss the detail of this model, because the detail of this model change a little bit with parameters, so it's more the overall sense that matters to me. Do I get prograde rotation? Do I get retrograde differential rotation? Do I get organization of magnetic field? So in this first attempt to make a model that coupled with a radiative zone, a very thin one, as you can see, was only down to 0.6, where the other one was going down to 0.06, so much deeper.
What happens there physically, you know, why it's pushed in the convection zone while it stays at high latitude, it stays dotted line, and then it's
But I think part of that is perhaps due to kind of a viscous torque or viscous. I'm wondering if one of the problems we were having in the first series of models we were computing was not due to the fact that since we were keeping the viscosity the same, even in a radiative interior, we were having too much viscous torquing between the radiative interior and the convection zone. So right now,
it depends on latitudes for some reason. Very strongly.
yeah, but convection also in our simulation. In a low resolution case, there is a difference between the convection outside the tangent cylinder and the convection inside the tangent cylinder. So that plus some viscous torque could explain some of the differences.
So it's a part of Taylor-Pradman.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you put magnetic field in this simulation with both convection and magnetic and radiation, you find that in the convection we get the same things that we were getting in our models where we didn't have radiative interior. But in a radiative interior we start organizing the field much more. This is B-phi in both. Here in the convection zone it's a mass and intermittent field, and this is more organized. Okay. And so if you look at
dynamo, can you show it? I cannot go that fast. So we calculate a dynamo, what's our make complexity here?
So this is VR and B-phi at mid-depth in the convection zone of our model, and this is B-phi in the stable zone below the convection zone.
Okay. It's a dynamo, engineered by dynamo.
It's a dynamo. So we put a seed field in the convection zone, the dynamo is triggered, we get a highly intermittent field like we did in 2004 when we were doing only convection zone, but we have turbulent pumping, diffusion of field, advection by meridional circulation into the stable layer. And in the stable layer, because we have a tachocline of shear, we organize the field into toroidal ribbons.
How you detected that this field is generated in convective zone, not in the stable stratified zone? How you can separate it?
Because we have developed a diagnosis, and the diagnosis based only on the mean field, so you should be happy, where we have looked very carefully at all the production term and all the advection, pumping, advection, diffusion term, and we can look at this equation and all the terms and how they define in radius and latitude, and we can look at where the generation is and how it is located and how you transport field. So this is a paper we are writing currently, so it should be out soon.
So the field in the stable layer, that is not changing in time anymore?
I mean, in the convection, here you have the answer, I mean, you have part of the answer. So this is a purely convective model we published in 2004. This is a model with a small stable layer. Of course, we are going to review all this computation with the more extended one. You see that in the convection zone, this is as busy as in the previous model. But here you have magnetic layers that have been generated, okay, and are antisymmetric, like you expect if you are dominated by a dipole here. And you can see how this change as a function of time. This is a plot as a function of radius and time at a cut at 30 degrees of latitude. And you look at how we change as a function of time. So I made this figure in Boulder, and it looks like a boulder. You know, you have the mountain range here. So this is a local joke. And so you have fluctuation of fields a lot, you know, and you have a very strong field. But let's look here at the magnetic energy as a function of radius. In the convection zone, we have mean fields that are about 1%. And this dashed line is the ratio between the toroidal magnetic field, axisymmetric, as you were discussing, Fritz, over the total magnetic energy. So we are at the 1% level, or up to 3%. And you can see that in the tachocline, we go up to 80%. So we do get organization and much stronger field in the tachocline. So to answer your question, how can this model improve our understanding of the tachocline, of the dynamo? First, this computation demonstrates for the first time that in 3D, doing nonlinear modeling, full MHD, you can actually organize magnetic field in the tachocline, and that does work in making toroidal ribbons. The problem is that we don't get sunswap with this simulation. And I think the reason we don't get ribbons and toroidal flux at launch, and Lauren and I have been looking at emergence of toroidal structure in convection zone. It's a paper we published this year. I think the reason is that we are shooting ourselves twice in the foot. First, by having a constant diffusivity throughout the domain, or not varying much, let's say, we are in a situation where we are limiting the growth of our toroidal ribbons because the shear is being equilibrated by diffusion. And if you have a strong diffusion, you have a limitation of your amplification of your field. And you have reconnection very fast, and I think you are limiting the field. And because you are limiting the strength of the field, you are able to shear in a tachocline. You are also, since the buoyancy of a magnetic layer is proportional to B squared, you are also limiting the buoyancy of your layer. And so I think that if we are able to compute the same kind of models, but by dropping the magnetic diffusivity in a radiative zone by a factor of 2 orders or 3 orders of magnitude, we will have stronger toroidal ribbons in the tachocline, and since it's proportional to B squared, they will perhaps become unstable and buoyant. And if that's true, then we will have perhaps these layers generating toroidal ribbons that will, not just a layer, but strong, more localized fibril structure that will then perhaps pop up, perhaps not at 45 degrees, but they will perhaps become buoyant and rise.
So just amplification by differential rotation, right? By
Yes, mostly.
Because it would differential rotation.
We have a shear. We have in the stable layer, which is about at 0.7, we have a strong shear, and this shear is taking the toroidal field or any field you put there, and there is an organization of the field to become more.
So is this shear imposed, or is it self-consistent?
It's self-consistently generated in this model in the convection zone, but it was imposed the solid body rotation was imposed by a viscous torque here. But in the other series of models I've been showing you, this one, in this one, we do nothing. We have no forcing term, everything is done.
The viscosity in the radiative core.
And that's my new series of models, and I think
so you
they are.
decrease the viscosity.
I have decreased the viscosity, and I'm going to have one PhD student in US who has put magnetic field in the convection zone, and we have one PhD student in France who have put magnetic field in the radiative interior, and we are going to compute all these models and try to see what's the outcome of this.
Okay.
Well, I think I talked enough.
Suggestion, maybe we'll finish now, otherwise we will. Right. Yeah. Okay, and then if there are questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.